Okinawa, August 1945. The cave smelled of sulfur and unwashed bodies, the darkness so complete it had weight. Sachiko Tanaka pressed her back against the limestone wall, feeling dampness seep through her tattered uniform. Her fingers traced the grenade pin she'd been holding for 3 hours, the metal warm now, almost alive against her skin. Through the cave mouth, 30 feet away, sunlight cut through dust like a blade, and beyond it, voices in English, American voices. Everything she had been taught said this was the moment to pull the pin. Better to die Japanese than live dishonored. The propaganda films had been explicit. American soldiers, especially the Negro troops they sent to dishonor captured women, would do unspeakable things. Rape, mutilation, displays of savagery that proved the superiority of the Yamato race. The instructional officer in Manila had shown photographs, probably fabricated, but convincing enough. She remembered his words, "They are demons in human skin. They will make you wish for death." But Sachiko was a nurse, trained to observe, and what she observed through that cave entrance didn't match the doctrine. The boots approaching were cautious, not aggressive. The voices calling in broken Japanese sounded tired, not bloodthirsty. And when the first American appeared, silhouetted against the terrible brightness, he didn't look like a demon at all. He looked young, maybe 20, with dust on his uniform and fear in the way he held his rifle. "Nobody's going to hurt you," he said through a translator, and Sachiko made a choice that would change everything. She set down the grenade. She had been 28 when the war found her, a nursing student in Osaka with clean hands and uncomplicated dreams. The military recruited her in 1942, promised her purpose, told her she would save Japanese lives and serve the Emperor's divine mission. They sent her to field hospitals across the Pacific. First Rabaul, then the Philippines, finally Okinawa. She had treated shattered men in makeshift operating rooms, held their hands while they died, written letters to families she knew would never receive them. The war had filed down her innocence until only pragmatism remained, sharp and cold as a scalpel. Around her in the cave, 36 other women waited. Teachers, factory workers, telegraph operators. Yuki Watanabe, barely 19, who hadn't spoken in 3 months. The girl had been in a comfort station in Manila, military brothel, though no one used that word, and when American forces overran the position, she'd been captured with documents still identifying her as station worker. The shame had stolen her voice. She sat now with her knees drawn to her chest, rocking slightly, waiting for whatever came next. Keiko Yamamoto was different. At 35, the widow sat rigid with dignity, her telegraph operator's posture perfect despite the filth and fear. Her husband had died at Midway 3 years ago. She'd volunteered for military service the next day, driven by grief that crystallized into certainty. America was evil, and Japan's cause was righteous. Even now, even in this moment of surrender, Keiko's face showed defiance. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. The Americans came into the cave carefully, weapons lowered, eyes adjusting to darkness. The one who'd spoken first was a sergeant, his stripes visible even through the dust. Irish-American, Sachiko would learn later from Boston, with a name that sounded like music. McCarthy. He'd fought across the Pacific, lost friends at Iwo Jima, and now stood in this cave, looking at 36 terrified women and trying not to show his own confusion. "Jesus Christ," he muttered in English, and Sachiko understood the tone if not the words. Not triumph, something closer to sorrow. They emerged into sunlight that felt like violence after weeks underground. Sachiko stumbled, caught herself, blinked against brightness that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Okinawan landscape stretched before her, transformed by war into something unrecognizable. Trees stood skeletal and black. Villages had become arrangements of ash. But beyond the devastation, she could see it. The ocean, impossibly blue, indifferent to human suffering. A female American officer was waiting, lieutenant's bars on her collar, Chinese features that marked her as something unexpected. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Army Nurse Corps, who would later tell Sachiko that her own parents had been born in Guangdong before immigrating to San Francisco, where they now sat in an internment camp because America feared its own citizens. The ironies of this war were infinite and exhausting. The medical inspection was clinical, respectful, humiliating only in the way all examinations are when you've lost autonomy over your own body. Chen's hands were gentle, her eyes professional. She checked for wounds, malnutrition, disease. The delousing powder came next, white and choking, necessary after weeks in the cave, but still degrading. They were given clothes, oversized marine fatigues that hung on malnourished frames. The letters PW had been stenciled on the back. Prisoner of war. The words felt both like condemnation and unexpected mercy. Sachiko watched everything, cataloging details her propaganda training hadn't prepared her for. The Marines were organized but not cruel. They worked with efficiency that spoke of exhaustion rather than malice. when an older woman, Tomoko, a teacher from Nagasaki, collapsed from heat and hunger. A young Marine medic rushed forward without hesitation. His hands on her pulse were sure and careful. He called for water, for shade, for help. Yuki flinched violently when he approached her. Trauma response so ingrained she couldn't control it, but he stepped back immediately, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "It's okay," he said softly, though she couldn't understand English. "It's okay." These small mercies accumulated like evidence against everything Sachiko believed. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful, a pressure behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the brutal sun. The trucks came at dusk, open-sided to let air move through the tropical heat. They drove north through a landscape that looked like the aftermath of apocalypse. Okinawa had been beautiful once, Sachiko had heard. An island of coral and pine, of villages older than memory. Now it was a garden of ghosts. Burned-out tanks rusted in fields. Craters pocked the earth like disease. And everywhere the smell, sweet and terrible, the smell of death not yet finished with its work. But there was something else too. Life, insisting on itself. Jungle creeping back over scars. Birds calling in the gathering darkness. And the ocean, always the ocean, visible in flashes between hills, vast and eternal and utterly unconcerned with human ideologies. Sachiko sat in the truck bed, watching the Marines who guarded them. They were diverse in a way Japanese propaganda had shown as weakness. White soldiers, black soldiers, brown soldiers, even the Chinese-American translator, Private James Nakamura, whose face showed his own complicated relationship with this war. They didn't speak to the prisoners much, but their silence wasn't cruel. They passed back canteens when the heat became unbearable. One of them, a young black Marine named Marcus Brown, noticed a woman about to faint and called for the convoy to stop, waiting in shade until she recovered. Sachiko found herself staring at these black soldiers with fascination that shamed her. In Japan, black people existed only in propaganda, caricatures of savagery, proof of American degeneracy. She'd seen the posters, a gorilla in an American uniform captioned with warnings about the rape and murder that would come with defeat. But these men were ordinary. They looked tired. They smoked cigarettes and talked quietly among themselves. One of them was reading a letter from home, his lips moving slightly as he read, and the tenderness in his face as he carefully refolded the paper was achingly human. "What did they tell you?" she heard herself ask in halting English, surprising herself. The question was directed at no one in particular, but Nakamura, the translator, turned to look at her. "Tell us about what?" he asked, his Japanese flawless, his accent Tokyo perfect. "About us, about Japanese people." Nakamura was quiet for a long moment, the truck bouncing over rutted roads. Finally, "They told us you'd fight to the death, that you'd never surrender, that you believed your emperor was a god, and death in his service was the highest honor." He paused. "They told us the truth, mostly." "And what did they tell us about you?" Sachiko said, though she knew he understood the question beneath the question. "Probably," Nakamura said carefully, "that we were less than human." The silence that followed was filled with the sound of the engine, the rustle of wind through destroyed palms, the ocean breathing somewhere close by. The camp appeared as the sun touched the horizon, turning everything gold and red. It had been a Japanese installation once, Sachiko could see. The architecture was familiar, the layout recognizable, but the Americans had transformed it, made it functional in ways Japanese military efficiency never quite achieved. Barracks stood in neat rows, guard towers rose at intervals, but the guards inside looked bored rather than vigilant, reading newspapers, smoking, existing in the peculiar limbo of war that's ending but hasn't quite ended yet. Captain Thomas Wright stood on the headquarters steps as they arrived. He was 40 maybe, with a Midwestern farmer's build and eyes that had seen too much. Through Nakamura's translation, his words were formal, almost gentle. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will work, you will be paid, you will be fed, you will not be harmed. Follow the rules, and you will find life here tolerable." Sachiko listened to these words with the ears of someone who'd been lied to professionally and often. This had to be deception, elaborate cruelty before the real treatment began. But something in Wright's voice gave her pause. He sounded tired. Not like a man preparing torture, but like a man trying to do a difficult job with whatever honor remained to him. The barracks were simple but clean. Wooden bunks, thin mattresses, actual mosquito netting. Sachiko touched the netting and felt something break in her chest. Such a small thing, such basic care, but they'd been living in caves and eating grass for weeks. There were lockers for personal possessions they didn't have. Fans turned overhead, moving air that remained thick and hot but at least was moving. In the corner, impossibly, a radio played American music. Big band jazz, bright and complex and completely at odds with everything this moment should be. "This is how they break you," Keiko said, her voice hard with certainty. With comfort, with kindness. Then comes the punishment. But Sachiko, touching the mosquito netting, feeling its delicate strength, wasn't so sure. She'd seen enough of war to know that cruelty was lazy, simple, easy. This careful organization, this provision of basic dignity, required effort, required someone deciding that even enemies deserved to sleep without insect bites. That first night, she lay on the thin mattress and listened to women crying quietly in the darkness. Some wept from relief, some from shame at being captured alive, some from the terrible uncertainty of not knowing what came next. Sachiko didn't cry. She stared at the ceiling fan rotating slowly above her and thought about everything she'd been taught, everything she'd believed, and the growing suspicion that all of it, every single certainty, might be wrong. Outside, American soldiers walked patrol routes, their boots crunching on gravel. Someone was playing a harmonica, the notes drifting across the compound with unbearable sweetness. The ocean breathed in the distance, steady as a heartbeat, and Sachiko fell asleep listening to it, dreaming of water she could see but not yet touch. Morning came at 5, the sky still gray with dawn. Roll call in the compound yard, mist hanging in the trees like uncertainty made visible. American voices counting in English, then Nakamura's translation confirming the count in Japanese. Sachiko stood in formation, her body remembering military discipline even as her mind struggled with where she was, who was commanding her now. The guards were methodical, professional, bored. No cruelty, but no particular kindness either. Just men doing a job they wanted finished. Then came breakfast, and the second great shock occurred. The mess hall was long and wooden, screened windows letting in morning air that tasted of salt and jungle. Women filed in expecting, what? Watery rice gruel? Stale bread? The starvation rations that had defined the last years of war? Instead, they found trays loaded with scrambled eggs, spam glistening with fat white bread that was actually soft, butter that was actually butter, coffee with real cream. Sachiko stood frozen, tray in hand, staring at food that would have been luxury in peacetime Japan and was absolutely impossible now, in defeat. Around her, women made small sounds of confusion, disbelief, hunger so profound it hurt. One woman began crying silently, tears cutting clean lines through the dust still on her face despite yesterday's delousing. A black soldier serving the line noticed their hesitation. He spoke no Japanese, but his gesture transcended language. He mimed eating, smiled slightly, moved on to the next woman. Permission granted. Acknowledgement of shared humanity. Sachiko ate slowly, each bite a small ceremony of reckoning. The eggs were hot and soft, salted perfectly. The spam was rich with fat her body desperately needed. The coffee was bitter and strong and absolutely perfect. Across the Pacific, in the ruins of Japanese cities, people were eating sawdust bread and potato peels, trading family treasures for bags of rice, watching children die of malnutrition in the streets. Here, prisoners, dishonored, defeated prisoners, ate better than they had eaten in years. The guilt was almost unbearable, but hunger won, as hunger always does, and she finished everything on her plate. Yuki ate like someone afraid the food would vanish, stuffing bread into her mouth until she choked, had to slow down, tears streaming. Tomoko, the old teacher, ate with deliberate grace, but Sachiko saw her hands trembling. Only Keiko maintained perfect dignity, eating properly, giving no sign that this abundance affected her. But she finished every bite, and when she thought no one was watching, her face crumpled briefly into something like grief. Work assignments came after breakfast. Sachiko, with her medical training, was asked if she would assist in the camp clinic. Lieutenant Chen made the request personally, her English careful. "We need help. You have skills. Will you work with us?" Sachiko's first instinct was suspicion. Why would they trust her? What was the angle? But Chen's face showed only professional respect, one nurse to another, and Sachiko found herself nodding yes. The clinic was better equipped than any field hospital Sachiko had worked in during the war. Real antibiotics, not the diluted versions Japan had been producing. Sulfa drugs in abundance. Bandages that were clean, sterile, plentiful. Medical instruments that hadn't been improvised from kitchen tools. She stood in the supply room and felt her professional soul weep with envy and shame. How many Japanese soldiers had she watched die for lack of the medicines that sat here in simple plenty? Chen showed her the routine with quiet efficiency. Minor injuries, tropical diseases, the endless battle against infection in this climate. They worked side by side for 3 hours before either spoke beyond medical necessity. Finally, during a break, Chen said, "You're good. Better than some of our corpsmen." "I trained in Osaka," Sachiko said, the words coming out defensive. "Before the war, Japanese medical training was excellent." "I don't doubt it," Chen said. "War makes waste of everything, doesn't it? Including talent." They sat in silence, drinking water from metal cups, listening to the sounds of the camp, men working, orders being called, somewhere a radio playing that impossible American jazz. "My parents," Chen said suddenly, are in an internment camp in California because the government decided Japanese Americans couldn't be trusted. Locked up, lost their business, everything, because of their faces. Sachiko looked at her. This woman who was Chinese, not Japanese, but carried the weight of America's suspicion anyway. But you serve. Yes, Chen said, because someone has to prove them wrong. Someone has to be better than the fear. She paused. That's why we're here, treating you like humans instead of trophies. Someone has to prove we're better than the propaganda says. The words settled in Sachiko's chest like seeds that might eventually grow into something she couldn't yet name. Keiko was assigned to the kitchens, which she accepted with stiff dignity masking rage. Cooking for the enemy, serving those who had killed her husband. But the head cook, Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, was a 40-year-old Mexican-American woman from Texas with no patience for drama and absolute standards for her kitchen. You know how to cook rice? Rodriguez asked through Nakamura's translation. Of course, Keiko said, offended. Good, show me. Keiko cooked rice the way her mother had taught her, the way generations of Japanese women had perfected, washing until the water ran clear, precise water ratios, perfect timing. Rodriguez watched, tasted, nodded once. Good, now I'll show you how we make it in Texas. It should have been an insult. It became something else. Two women, enemies by nation, professionals by nature, finding common ground in the shared language of feeding people well. Rodriguez demanded excellence and gave respect in return. By the third day, Keiko was teaching Rodriguez how to properly fold gyoza, while Rodriguez taught her the secrets of tamales. Neither would have called it friendship, but it was something. Yuki was assigned to the laundry, which turned out to be mercy. The work was physical but solitary, rhythmic. Washing marine uniforms in giant tubs, hanging them to dry in the tropical sun. No one pressured her to speak, no one touched her unexpectedly. And in the steam and soap smell, surrounded by the simple motion of wash and rinse and wring, something in her began to thaw. Private Danny O'Brien, 19 years old from Brooklyn, worked laundry duty rotation. He'd grown up poor, knew what it meant to be invisible, and recognized trauma when he saw it. He never approached Yuki directly, just worked nearby, humming sometimes, and left small kindnesses. A cup of water within reach, a cloth for wiping sweat. Once a flower he'd found growing wild, left on her workstation without comment. The first time Yuki smiled, barely, it was at that flower. O'Brien saw it from across the laundry and felt something uncomplicated in his chest. Maybe this whole damn war wasn't completely without redemption. 3 weeks in, the Red Cross established mail service. Women could write home. The announcement created chaos of emotion. Hope, fear, desperate need, paralyzing shame. What do you say to family when you've been captured alive? When you're eating well while they starve? When everything you were raised to believe says you should have died with honor? Sachiko wrote to her mother in careful characters, trying to find truth that wouldn't wound. I am alive. I am imprisoned on Okinawa. I am fed, clothed, unharmed. The Americans are not as we were told. I don't know how to explain this. Please tell me about home. How is father? She didn't mention that she ate eggs every morning. Didn't mention that American medicine was saving lives Japanese medicine couldn't. Didn't mention the black soldiers who guarded them without violence, or the Chinese-American nurse who treated her like a colleague, or the moments when she forgot briefly that these were supposed to be demons. Keiko's letter was even more sparse. She wrote to her children, evacuated somewhere in the countryside she hoped was far from bombing. I live. I think of you daily. Be strong for Japan. 3 drafts crumpled before she settled on this, because anything more felt like betrayal, of her husband's memory, of Japan's honor, of everything she'd built her life upon. Yuki held a pen for an hour, unable to form a single character. Her family thought she was dead. Better that than know she'd been in a comfort station. Better anything than that shame. Lieutenant Chen found her trembling, paper blank, and sat down quietly beside her. You don't have to write, Chen said, but you can, whenever you're ready. Yuki's voice, unused for so long, came out as a whisper. They think I died honorably. Maybe, Chen said. Survival is its own kind of honor. The responses began arriving 4 weeks later. Sachiko's mother wrote in shaking characters that were hard to read. Hiroshima is destroyed. A single bomb. Your father was visiting his brother there when it fell. We have no news. He is certainly dead. Nothing remains. Japan has surrendered. The emperor spoke on radio. His voice was human, which somehow surprised us. If you are fed and safe, this is more than most of us have. Live, daughter. There is no shame in living. Sachiko read this in the clinic supply room, alone. The letter dropped from her hands. Her father was dead, vaporized by a weapon she couldn't comprehend. Dead while she ate eggs and worked in a clean clinic and slowly, traitorously, began to see her captors as human. Chen found her there an hour later, silent tears cutting lines down her face. The lieutenant said nothing, just sat nearby, a quiet presence. Finally, Sachiko spoke. Your people did this bomb. Yes, Chen said, and I'm sorry for your loss. The complexity of that moment, enemy offering condolence, grief existing alongside gratitude for survival, was more than Sachiko knew how to hold. She cried for her father, for Hiroshima, for the impossible moral mathematics of a war where the people who killed your family also kept you fed and treated you with basic dignity. Both things were true. How do you hate and be grateful simultaneously? How do you grieve and heal in the same breath? That night, Sachiko wrote in the diary she'd started keeping hidden in her locker, "I begin to understand that we were lied to about everything. Not small lies, but lies so large they built an entire world, and now that world is collapsing, and I don't know what to believe instead. Except this. The ocean is still there, beyond the wire. I can see it from the barracks window, and I want, more than anything I've wanted since this war began, to touch it. Just once. To feel something that was true before all these lies, and will be true after." In the darkness, other women wrote similar thoughts, or whispered them to friends, or simply felt them without words. The ocean called to them, visible but unreachable, a reminder of home and peace and everything the war had stolen. They were so close, just 5 miles. Might as well have been 5,000. But Sachiko, falling asleep to the sound of waves she couldn't touch, didn't know that sometimes the distance between wanting and having is just one question, asked to the right person, at the right time. October came to Okinawa with heat that refused to break, air so thick with moisture it felt like breathing underwater. 3 months in Camp Concordia had established rhythms that felt almost normal: wake at 5, roll call, breakfast, work, dinner, evening free time behind wire fences that no longer seemed as threatening as they once had. Sachiko worked in the clinic alongside Lieutenant Chen, their hands moving in practiced synchronization over wounded bodies that were, increasingly, just bodies. Not American bodies or enemy bodies, just flesh that needed mending. But normalcy was a lie they all pretended to believe. Repatriation rumors had started circulating. The war was over. Truly over, Japan occupied, the emperor's divinity officially renounced. Soon these women would be sent home to a country they no longer recognized, to cities that existed only as ash, to families scattered or dead or starving. The future was a weight pressing down on every moment, making the present both precious and unbearable. Sachiko stood at the clinic window one evening, watching the sun sink toward the ocean she could see but never touch. The water was turning gold and orange, the colors so vivid they hurt. She'd been dreaming about the ocean for weeks now, not anxious dreams, but memories. Her father teaching her to swim in Osaka Bay when she was 7, his hands steady under her back until she found her courage. Walking along the shore with her mother, collecting shells, the world simple and whole. The ocean in her dreams was warm and forgiving, and she always woke reaching for water that wasn't there. "You're thinking about it again," Chen said, not looking up from the inventory she was conducting. 3 months had made them fluent in each other's silences. "About what?" "The ocean." You get this look. Sachiko turned from the window. "Is it so obvious?" "Only to someone who's paying attention." Chen set down her clipboard. "Why don't you ask?" "Ask what?" "To see it, to go to the beach. The war's over. What's the worst they can say?" The suggestion was so unexpected, so impossible, that Sachiko laughed. "They would say no. Of course they would say no." "Maybe," Chen said. "Or maybe they'd surprise you. Americans are sentimental about things like that. Last wishes, final requests. Very Hollywood." She smiled slightly. "Besides, you won't know unless you ask." The idea took root despite Sachiko's skepticism. She mentioned it to the other women that night in the barracks, half joking, expecting dismissal. Instead, she saw the same hunger she felt reflected in their faces. Yuki, who spoke in full sentences now, whispered, "I was born near the sea, in Hokkaido. I dream about it constantly." "In Japan," Tomoko said, her teacher's voice measured and thoughtful, "the ocean is everywhere. We are an island nation. The sea is in our blood, our history, our souls. Here we can see it, but cannot touch it. It's like being shown food you cannot eat." Even Keiko, still maintaining her dignified distance from comfort, looked up from the letter she was writing. "Before my husband died, we lived near the coast. Our children played in the tide pools. I would—" She stopped, vulnerability briefly cracking her armor. "I would like to see the ocean again, to remember when my life held beauty." The conversation spread through the barracks like fever. Women who had been resigned to their imprisonment suddenly animated with longing. They were going home soon to a Japan destroyed, to uncertainty and probable hardship and shame. Before that, couldn't they have this? One moment of peace? One memory of something that existed before the war and would exist after, unchanging and eternal? "Someone should ask," Yuki said, looking at Sachiko. "You speak the best English. You have... They respect you." Sachiko felt the weight of their hope settle on her shoulders. "They'll say no. Probably, Tomoko agreed. But what do we lose by asking? The next evening, Sachiko found Sergeant McCarthy smoking under a pine tree near the camp perimeter, watching the sunset with the exhausted patience of a man counting days until he could go home. 3 months of daily interaction had created something between them that wasn't quite friendship, the war had made that impossible, but resembled mutual respect. He'd learned she was a good nurse who took her work seriously. She'd learned he was a decent man trying to do an indecent job with whatever honor remained available. Sergeant McCarthy-san, she said, using the Japanese honorific that always made him smile slightly. Tanaka, he replied, not bothering with her rank since she technically had none anymore. You need something? Sachiko had rehearsed this, but the words still came out awkward, too formal. I have request. For the women. Okay. He took a drag on his cigarette, waiting. The ocean. We can see it from camp, but we cannot touch it. We cannot go to it. She paused, searching for English words adequate to explain. In Japan, ocean is everywhere. It is part of us. Here, we are so close, but cannot reach. Before we go home to ruins, before everything ends, we want to remember something beautiful. We want to stand in the water. Just once. McCarthy was quiet for a long moment, smoke curling from his cigarette into the humid air. You want to go to the beach? Yes. You understand that's a security risk. You could try to escape. Where would we escape to? Sachiko gestured at the island around them. We are on Okinawa. It is occupied. We have nowhere to go. We just want to see the ocean. He studied her face with eyes that had learned to read people in the terrible classroom of war. How many women? Not all. 12, maybe. Those who need this most. Let me talk to the captain, McCarthy said finally. No promises. The debate in Captain Wright's office lasted an hour. Sachiko would learn the details later from Chen, who was present as the medical officer and only woman in the room. Wright's initial reaction was predictable. Absolutely not. Too risky, against regulations. Insane to even consider. But Chen argued with quiet intensity about trauma, about dignity, about the fact that these women had been model prisoners who'd cooperated fully and deserved some acknowledgement of their humanity. Private Nakamura, the translator, offered cultural context. In Japanese understanding, he said, the ocean has spiritual significance. It's about purification, about connection to ancestors, to homeland. This isn't just recreation. It's like church, maybe. Or prayer. Sergeant McCarthy added his practical observation. These women aren't going to run, sir. They're malnourished. They don't know the island, and they know they're going home soon anyway. And it might... He paused, choosing words carefully. It might be something we could all feel decent about, when we're old and trying to sleep at night. Wright sat behind his desk, rubbing his face with both hands. He was 42, exhausted, wanted nothing more than to return to his farm in Iowa and forget this war had ever happened. But he'd been raised Methodist, believed in mercy even when it was inconvenient, and recognized that denying this request would accomplish nothing except proving that kindness had limits. Small group, he said finally. 12 women maximum, heavy escort, 1 hour only, secluded beach, away from main installations, and if anything goes wrong, if even one of them tries to run, it's on all of you. The women selected themselves, a process of quiet negotiation in the barracks. Sachiko, obviously. Yuki, who needed this more than she needed most things. Keiko, surprising everyone by volunteering immediately. Tomoko and 9 others, each carrying their own reasons, their own ghosts that needed the ocean's absolution. The morning of the trip dawned clear and brutal, the sun already fierce at 7 a.m. The women dressed carefully in the cleanest clothes they had, still POW fatigues, still marked, but washed and pressed with a care that spoke of ceremony. Yuki had braided her hair, the first time she'd styled it in months. Keiko wore the bearing of someone preparing for an important event, spine straight, face composed. 2 trucks waited, engines idling. 8 Marines for 12 women, McCarthy, O'Brien, Rodriguez, and 5 others. Lieutenant Chen came as medical officer, Nakamura as translator. The math of trust and suspicion calculated in the ratio of guards to prisoners. The drive began in silence, tension keeping everyone quiet. But as the trucks moved away from camp into areas of Okinawa that had escaped the worst destruction, something shifted. The jungle here was still green, still alive. Birds called from trees that hadn't been shelled into oblivion, and the smell, salt and growing things. Life insisting on itself despite everything. Sachiko sat in the truck bed, hands gripping the metal side, watching the landscape transform from war zone to something approaching peace. Beside her, Yuki was crying silently, tears streaming down her face while she smiled. Keiko sat rigid, but her eyes were hungry, drinking in every glimpse of blue visible through the trees. "First time I saw the Pacific," Rodriguez said, breaking the silence. "I cried. I'm from Texas, you know. Desert country. All that water stretching to forever. It made everything else seem small." Keiko turned to look at her, something softening in her face. "In Japan, we say the ocean remembers everything." "Then maybe," Rodriguez said quietly, "it can help us forget what we need to forget." The road crested a hill, and there it was. The Pacific Ocean spreading before them like an answer to a question they hadn't known how to ask. The water was impossible colors, turquoise near shore deepening to cobalt at the horizon, white foam lacing the reef line, paradise despite being on an island that had recently hosted hell. The women gasped collectively, several began crying. One started laughing, the sound bright and broken and real. Young Private O'Brien, 19 and still bewildered by war, watched them and whispered to McCarthy, "I don't get it. It's just water." McCarthy, who'd been island hopping for 2 years and had learned things about suffering that had aged him beyond his 24 years, said, "When everything you know is gone, you hold on to pieces you can find. That ocean connects them to home, to who they were before all this." The beach was a small cove, sheltered and private, white sand unmarked by battle. Palm trees provided shade. The water looked clean enough to drink, so clear you could see fish moving in the shallows. The trucks stopped, engines cutting out, leaving only the sound of waves and wind and women breathing like they'd forgotten how. Captain Wright had given specific parameters. 1 hour, stay within the marked boundaries, no wandering off. McCarthy repeated these rules through Nakamura's translation, but his voice was gentle. Everyone understood this was grace, temporary and precious, and nobody wanted to break it. The women removed their boots at the water's edge, an automatic gesture of Japanese custom, shoes off before entering sacred space. Sachiko was first, wading in slowly, water warm on her ankles, cool underneath. She walked until she was knee-deep, then knelt, bringing her face to the water, lips touching the surface. A prayer for her father, dead in Hiroshima's flash. A prayer for the war to truly be over, not just officially, but in her heart. A prayer for forgiveness she didn't deserve, and couldn't quite name. The others followed, each finding their own ritual. Yuki walked fully clothed into the water until it reached her waist, then stood motionless, arms spread, eyes closed, letting the waves wash over her. Symbolic cleansing, baptism into a life that might, someday, feel clean again. When she emerged, her face was transformed. "I can feel something besides fear," she said to no one in particular. "I didn't think I'd ever feel anything else, but I can." Tomoko, the teacher, began collecting shells with the focused intensity of someone gathering evidence that beauty still existed. She found cowries, spirals, fragments of coral shaped like flowers. "For lessons," she explained to Private O'Brien, who'd wandered close enough to watch. "When I go home, if there are still children to teach, I will tell them about this beach, about how the ocean connects rather than divides." O'Brien, whose formal education had ended at 16, nodded thoughtfully and began helping her search, pointing out good specimens with the unself-conscious kindness that was his nature. They couldn't speak the same language, but the shared task created its own communication. Keiko sat in the sand at the water's edge, waves washing over her legs in rhythmic intervals. Rodriguez sat nearby, not too close, respecting the invisible boundary that still existed between guard and prisoner. After a while, Keiko spoke in her careful English. "My husband died at Midway. His ashes are somewhere in the Pacific. I wanted to spread them properly, but Midway is so far. This water touches those waters, yes? Maybe it is enough." Rodriguez was quiet then. "My brother died at Guadalcanal, somewhere under this same ocean. I think about that. How the water connects everything, even the dead. 2 women who should have been enemies, sitting on the same beach, mourning into the same sea. The complexity was almost unbearable." The younger women began to play, splashing each other tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. Laughter rose, genuine and startling. The Marines watched, some smiling, some looking uncomfortable with this glimpse of humanity in people they'd been taught to see as other, but nobody stopped the laughter. It felt too much like hope, and hope was in short supply. Sachiko walked along the shore until she found McCarthy standing at the boundary, rifle held loosely, eyes on the horizon rather than the prisoners. She approached carefully, aware that 3 months of respect didn't erase everything. "Thank you," she said. "You did not have to do this." "No," he agreed. "We didn't, but seemed like the right thing." In Japan, there is concept. On. It means obligation, debt of gratitude that can never be fully repaid. I have onto you. McCarthy turned to look at her, this enemy who'd become something more complicated. You don't owe me anything, Tanaka. Just, when you go home, tell people what really happened here. Tell them we weren't monsters. Tell them the truth, even if it's complicated. That's enough. Sachiko met his eyes, understanding what he was asking. Memory as testimony. Truth as resistance to propaganda. I will remember, she said. I will tell it true. Private Nakamura appeared with his camera, asking permission to document the moment. After brief discussion, the women agreed. They stood at the water's edge, 12 Japanese prisoners in American fatigues, Marines visible in the background. The photograph captured something that shouldn't have existed, enemies sharing space without violence, war momentarily suspended by the simple human need to touch something beautiful. The hour passed like water through fingers too fast and irretrievable. When McCarthy's whistle signaled time, the women gathered slowly, reluctant to leave. They collected their boots, their shells, their memories. Each took a last look at the ocean, trying to imprint it permanently in their minds against the future's uncertainty. The return journey should have been melancholy, but instead felt almost peaceful. The women sat in the trucks, salt drying on their skin, sand in their shoes, something settled in their chests. They'd been given a gift they couldn't fully explain but would never forget. 5 miles from camp, the lead truck developed engine trouble. The convoy stopped while Marines assessed the problem. Minor, fixable, 15 minutes maybe. The women sat in their truck beds, waiting. Jungle pressed close on both sides, dense enough to disappear into. Guards were distracted, focused on the mechanical issue. The moment stretched, filled with possibility. Sachiko caught Yuki's eye. The unspoken question hung between them. Do we run? Yuki's face showed the calculation, then something else. Decision, choice, refusal. She shook her head no. Keiko, the hardliner who'd clung longest to ideology, also shook her head. Not one woman moved toward the jungle. They sat peacefully, waiting for the Americans to fix the truck and take them back to their cage. McCarthy noticed. His eyes found Sachiko's, and in that look past understanding. They'd had the chance. The jungle was right there. But running would have betrayed the kindness they'd been shown. Running would have proven they were the untrustworthy enemy they could have been treated as from the beginning. They stayed because they'd been trusted. And in that trust, something fundamental had shifted. When they reached camp, the women filed back to their barracks in silence that felt like reverence. Salt still in their hair, shells hidden in pockets. The ocean's memory soaked into their skin. That night, they gathered to share what each had felt, what each had found in the water. The stories were different, but the truth was singular. For 1 hour, they'd been human beings who wanted to see the ocean, and other human beings had understood why that mattered. Sachiko wrote in her diary by lamplight, her characters careful and precise. Today we saw the ocean. We could have run. Not one of us moved. Because running would have betrayed the kindness we were shown. And in that choice, to stay when we could have fled, I understand something I didn't before. Kindness can be stronger than walls. Trust can be stronger than wire. We are still prisoners. They are still the enemy. But today we were also just human beings who wanted to touch the sea. And they were human beings who understood why that mattered. I don't know how to tell anyone who wasn't there what this means. How do you explain that your enemy gave you back your humanity, that in 1 hour at the beach you remembered who you were before the war made you into something else? In the darkness outside, Marines walked their patrols, boots crunching on gravel. Someone was playing a harmonica, the notes drifting across the compound. The ocean breathed in the distance, steady as a heartbeat. And inside the barracks, Japanese women fell asleep with salt on their skin, dreaming of water that would remember them long after the war became history. November brought cool air to Okinawa, mornings crisp enough to see breath. Repatriation orders arrived on official paper. Your usefulness as prisoners has ended. The women would be shipped back to Japan in groups over the coming weeks. Not home. Home didn't exist anymore. But to the geographic location that used to be home, before bombs and fire transformed it into something unrecognizable. Sachiko received her notice on a Tuesday. Departure, November 18th, 2 weeks away. Lieutenant Chen handed her the paper during morning clinic rounds. Their routine so established they worked in near silence, two professionals who happened to speak different languages and had fought on opposite sides of a war. I don't know how to go back, Sachiko said, folding the paper with origami precision. How do I explain that I'm alive because Americans fed me, healed me, drove me to see the ocean? You tell the truth, Chen said. Even when it's complicated, especially when it's complicated. Chen pulled a small package from her desk drawer. For the journey. Open it later. Then, quietly, when we're alone, you can call me Sarah. They shook hands formally, the gesture carrying weight beyond its simplicity. The last 2 weeks became a series of farewells. Keiko presented Sergeant Rodriguez with a carefully folded paper crane. In Japan, 1,000 cranes bring wishes to life. I have made only one, but I wish for you, peace, for your brother, for all who died, for all who remain. Rodriguez, tough woman who'd survived poverty and discrimination and war without crying, held the paper crane and wept. "I'll keep this. I'll show it to my kids someday." Yuki sought out Private O'Brien in the laundry. "Thank you for the music," she said in careful English. "It helped me find my voice." O'Brien pressed his harmonica into her hands. "Keep playing. Even when everything's hard, keep playing." She lifted it to her lips, played a simple scale, then smiled. Full, genuine. The first unguarded smile anyone had seen from her since Manila. O'Brien would remember that smile for the rest of his life. McCarthy found Sachiko on her last evening in camp, sitting under the pine tree where they'd first discussed the ocean. The sun was setting, turning everything gold and red. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Why did you do it?" Sachiko asked suddenly. "Why did you treat us well? You had every reason to hate." McCarthy watched the sun disappear into the ocean. "Because somebody has to stop the cycle. Hate is easy. You just point at somebody different and blame them for everything wrong. But that's what got us here, isn't it? If we just keep that going, what was any of this for? I believed terrible things," Sachiko said. "About black people, about Americans. I believed easily because it made me feel superior. And now? Now I know that every certainty I held was a lie. Now I have to live with that knowledge and build something different from it." She looked at him directly. "Do you forgive me?" "That's not for me to decide. The people who died, the ones who suffered, they're the ones you need forgiveness from, and most of them are gone." He paused. "But I believe you can change. I believe that even after everything, there's still a chance to build something better. Don't make me wrong about that." The next morning, women assembled with their small bundles, letters from home, shells from the beach, gifts from guards, memories packed carefully alongside possessions. Captain Wright saluted as they loaded into trucks. Lieutenant Chen embraced Sachiko briefly, against regulations. "Open the package," she whispered. Inside was a medical textbook and a note. "For the nurse who will teach the next generation. Build something better." The ship carrying them home was crowded and uncomfortable, but infinitely better than the cave they'd surrendered from. During the crossing, stories were shared. Some men had been in camps where brutality was common. They were bitter, unchanged. When the women from Camp Concordia told their stories, of kindness, of the ocean, of black soldiers who showed no violence, these men called them liars, collaborators. But others listened thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the lesson," one officer said quietly, "that we always have choices, even in war." Keiko stood at the ship's rail as Japan appeared through morning mist. Small, wounded, occupied. "Are you afraid?" a younger woman asked. "Yes, but not of what I was afraid of before. Now I'm afraid I won't be strong enough to live differently, that I'll go home and the old ways will be easier." Then we help each other. We remember together. On the dock in Yokohama, before dispersing to different futures, Sachiko gathered them one last time. "We were shown kindness when cruelty would have been easier. We were trusted when suspicion would have been justified. Remember this. When the old voices start whispering that Japan should return to the old ways, remember that the old ways brought only destruction. Remember that different is possible." They bowed to each other, deep and formal, then walked in different directions into the ruins of Japan, carrying memories that would shape the rest of their lives. In the years that followed, Sachiko became a nursing instructor in Osaka, teaching medicine but also something else. That enemies could become healers, that kindness was strength, that certainty was often just fear disguised as courage. When she died in 1989, her papers included shells from a beach she'd visited for 1 hour in October 1945. Yuki returned to Hokkaido, worked canneries by the sea, played O'Brien's harmonica until arthritis stiffened her fingers. She requested it be buried with her in 1998, this American instrument following a Japanese woman into death. Keiko opened a small Tokyo restaurant serving both Japanese and American dishes. Rodriguez's recipe cards framed on the wall. "Good food has no nationality," she told customers. "Good people have no borders." She died in 2001, surrounded by grandchildren she'd taught to see humanity first, nationality second. McCarthy became a Boston police officer known for treating all suspects with dignity. He kept a photograph of Japanese women at the beach in his wallet, showed it to his children. "This is why we fought, not to conquer, but to prove humanity survives even war." He died in 1987, the photograph still in his pocket. Chen became a colonel, specialized in trauma-informed care, established a foundation supporting survivors of wartime sexual violence, making Yuki's silent suffering mean something in the broader fight for dignity. O'Brien returned to Brooklyn, raised 4 kids, played harmonica on weekends. When his daughter found his war photograph, he told her about the girl who couldn't speak, the harmonica, and the simple truth that kindness costs nothing but means everything. On a beach in Okinawa, now developed with hotels and tourist facilities, waves still wash ashore with the same rhythm they've maintained for millennia. The sand holds no memory of 12 women who stood there for 1 hour in October 1945. But in the human realm, memory persists. The story became a footnote in history, rarely told, often dismissed as too small to matter in the grand narrative of war and peace. Yet it mattered to 12 women who touched salt water and remembered they were human before they were soldiers, prisoners, enemies. It mattered to the Marines who chose trust over suspicion, kindness over cruelty, humanity over ideology. And it matters still, in a world that constantly needs reminding. We are always capable of choosing differently. The ocean remembers nothing, but we must remember everything, especially the small moments of grace that prove, even in war's darkest chapters, that decency survives, that enemies can see each other clearly and choose compassion anyway, that the distance between wanting and receiving is sometimes just one question, asked honestly to someone brave enough to answer yes, we just wanted to see the ocean, and they let us, that's all, that's everything.